words, which we have quoted as our keynote address, has been quoted time and time again in Ghana, Africa, and beyond. There's a historical correction I would like to make. The last statement is not nation, it is family. And I'm thankful to my 1996-97 doctoral thesis external examiner, Professor Manime, formerly of the University of Cape Coast and an alumnus of the University of Ghana, for drawing my attention to what he calls a statement that has been misquoted over and over again. Historically, the word is family. I've gone through all the documents. It's educate a man, you educate an individual. If you educate a woman, you educate a nation, a family. Sorry. So I also have to orient myself to the truth of the history. I recall in the early 1990s, when I embarked on research on women in Ghana, I came across a book written by F. Amper, which was published in 1954, that gave a detailed account of the nomination by Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah of Miss Mabel Dove to represent the Ghana rural constituency. Incidentally, later in her life, she married Dr. J.B. Dankwa. And according to Amper, when Nkrumah nominated Mabel, the men who were present at the CPP meeting were not happy about it. An elderly man present reminded all the men, quote, that at one time in their lives, each and every one of them depended on the motherly cares of a woman. This admonition was used during her campaigns, and Mabel stood with Ni Amawelenu, barrister and vice chairman of the Ghana Congress Party, Mr. I.N. Peregina Brima, a speaker of the Muslim Association, a member of the Muslim Association Party, and an overwhelming majority. Mabel joined a legislative assembly of 104 members, and she was the only woman. This reminds me of Hawa Yakubu, the only woman. And elated Nkrumah, filled with great happiness, delivered the following statement as part of his speech at the Broadcasting House, Accra, 1954. And that's the speech. I think that is where the issue of the nation has come in. To my countrywomen, I say a special word. The election of your first woman member to the Legislative Assembly fills me with hope for your achievement. I trust that you will take an ever-increasing interest in the conduct of our affairs. And I recall with pride the words of Agri, educate the woman and you educate a nation. And it seems to me that that is what has been ringing. After Nkrumah said this in 1954, we've all been quoting nation. But the historical documents show that it is family. So I myself have to orient myself to the family, and all of us will have to orient ourselves to the importance of the family. The New Oxford Dictionary of English, edited by Judy Purcell, defines educate as one, give intellectual, moral, social instruction to someone, especially a child, typically at a school or university. 2, provide or pay for instruction for one's child, especially at a school. Or 3, give someone training in or information on a particular field. To educate in Ghana and the rest of Africa has from time immemorial been a double-edged sword. There has always been traditional training in the home and formal training for those who get the privilege to go to the building called school. I've adopted a 5-pronged approach in this address in order to put into historical perspective and appreciation Reverend Dr. Agri's words. First, I'll draw a brief historical picture of the beginning of formal education in the country from the early 15th century to the early 20th century, when the story of Achimota School unfolds. It will also show the immense contribution of the Christian missionaries from Western Europe. Second, I will dilate on formal education and its relationship to employment in the formal sector, particularly the colonial government service, now civil service, from 1821 up to the early 1930s. In the London Public Records Office and the Ghana National Archives in Accra, 1821 is regarded as the beginning of the government service. In the early 1930s, the admonition of Reverend Dr. Agri begins to reflect in families and in the informal and formal sectors of the country. Thirdly, I will examine the special role played by Governor Brigadier General Sir Gordon Gattisberg with respect to his appeal to the Secretary of State in London on the need for their greater involvement in formal education in Ghana, with special emphasis on the importance of educating girls and women. Fourthly, I will focus attention on the indefatigable roles played by Reverends Agri and Fraser in the campaign they waged together with Sir Gattisberg to commit the colonial government to get more involved in secondary and higher education. Fifthly and finally, I will indicate some of the positive effects of Reverend Dr. Agri's statement on the country. So we go to one, a brief historical background of formal education in Ghana from the early 15th century to the early 20th century. Formal education began in Ghana in the early 15th century in the Elmina Castle. According to Youngson, Davis, and Japon, in 1530, King Juan III of Portugal ordered the governor of Elmina Castle to, quote, teach the African children reading, writing, and the Holy Scriptures. In 1693-94, the British attempted to open a school in the Cape Coast Castle, but it was abandoned until 1711. Professor Amenome, in his book entitled A Concise History of Ghana, relates that the school continued off and on for over a century. When the Western Europeans began their voyages of discovery to Africa and beyond in the 15th century, they laid down three main aims, which is popularly referred to in African history as the 3 Gs: God, glory, and gold. God was the Christian factor. Glory was ultimate political control. And gold was not only the precious metal, but it also symbolized the natural resources of Africa. This is 15th century. So, galamsey, gold. The first European nation to arrive in Ghana was Portugal in 1471. The Portuguese, led by the Lisbon merchant Fernão Gomes, landed near the river Comwe in Axim. Soon afterwards, 4 of Gomes' men arrived at Shama and Elmina. At Shama, the Portuguese built a small fort. In 1482, the Portuguese built the Elmina Castle. Mr. F.K. Boa, in his book entitled The History of Ghana, states, and I quote, Portugal was a fervent Catholic nation when it began its voyages of discovery, and it is not surprising that on 20th January 1482, the first public mass was said at Elmina. In 1503, the chief of Efutu, together with his elders and 1,300 of his subjects, were baptized by Portuguese Catholic priests. In 1534, Elmina was made part of the diocese, with its headquarters on the island of Sao Tome. 3 monks were assigned to Elmina and asked to open mission stations in the country. After this date, we do not hear of the Catholic Church again until the 19th century. And Reverend Thomas Thompson was sent, and he sent 3 Cape Coast boys to England to receive formal education. The only survivor of that group, Philip Kwaku, was ordained a priest, and he returned to the country in 1765. In 1778, Reverend Kwaku headed a school in Cape Coast that initially had 12 boys on its register. He died in 1816, but the school has survived him. And we all know of the Philip Kwaku School. Then in 1828, the Basel Evangelical Missionary Society arrived in the country. They began work at Christians Bokusu, and then moved to Akora Prof 1841, Ebri 1847, Krobo 1849, Achim 1869, Kwo 1874. Then on 31st December 1834, the Wesley Methodist Missionary Society in England, led by Reverend Danwell, arrived in Cape Coast. If it must be done, it must be done well. That is where the insurance advert says. This is Reverend Danwell. Unfortunately, he died a year later, and so Reverend and Mrs. Wrigley were sent, but they also died after a few months. Then Reverend Thomas Birch Freeman followed suit, and he arrived in Cape Coast in 1838. He is described in the records as, quote, the son of an African father and an English mother, and through whom Methodist work took such roots that he came to be called the father of Gold Coast Methodism. Then we have the North German Missionary Society of Bremen following suit. They worked in Peking, 1847. Then in 1853, they moved to Keta because of local hostilities. And they concentrated their activities in the southeastern part of Ghana. Then in 1880, we have the Roman Catholics coming back, and they made Elmina their headquarters. 1896, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Zion Church of Philadelphia, and they worked at Cape Coast and Keta. Then the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they also began work in Sekedi in 1898, and the Baptist in the same year at Cape Coast. 1905, the Anglican Church returned, and then followed by the Salvation Army. They arrived in Dunkawanaguna in 1911, followed by the Lutheran Church. And the list of Christian missions in Ghana in the 20th and 21st centuries is endless. Mr. Bois relates, and I quote, the seed of the Christian religion in the country was sown in the 15th century, but the permanent establishment of the churches on a nationwide scale began from the second decade of the 19th century. By 1980, about half of Ghana's population was on record as belonging to one or other of the Christian churches. And although the nation could not be degraded as a Christian country, the churches were exercising remarkable influence in the society, unquote. Professor Menomah remarks, quote, all these missionary organizations that came to Ghana during the 19th and 20th centuries have remained and expanded their activities. The Christian missionaries made a lot of impact, and I've listed 7 quick ones. First of all, in terms of literature, they helped a lot in literature. They also helped in the field of agriculture. That's good. Now the coordination is going very well. And the Basel Mission in Kropong established a cocoa farm where seedlings were produced for farmers. From 20th to 21st October 2015, the Akrofi Crystal Institute of Theology, Mission and Culture in Akropo Equiapem organized a conference on the theme Christian Mission, Cocoa, and Socioeconomic, Political, and Religious Change in Ghana. Many of us were surprised to learn that Tetekwashi was an apprentice at the Basel Mission Workshop in Akropong before he left for Fernando Po and popularized cocoa by beginning commercial farming of the crop at Mampo Equiapem. Historically, today we are doing a lot of historical corrections. Historically, cocoa was brought into Ghana from Brazil by Reverend Haas. Between 1851 and the 1880s, Reverend Haas, Moore, and other missionaries cultivated cocoa. I remember when we were children, anytime our mother asked us to do a job, she would add, Monya no fe fe fe, they say Ura Mo true. Do it beautifully, like Mr. Mo's garden. I never understood it till I started teaching history, doing research. And I said, oh, this is the Mr. Mo my mother was talking about. The second contribution, the Christian missionaries developed legitimate trade to replace the transatlantic slave trade that had been the main commercial activity in Ghana from the 1650s until 1807, when it was abolished by the British government. Some of the directors of the missions were also directors of trading companies, such as the Basel Trading Company, set up in 1859, that later became known as the Union Trading Company. The Bremen missions had Victor opened trade in Ghana and Togo, and Reverend Philip Kakwe himself was also a trader. 3, in the medical field, The Christian missionaries established hospitals, clinics, dispensaries, and introduced Western medicine into the country. 4, in the technical sphere, they introduced new architectural styles, bricklaying, corrugated iron roofing, and so on. Then 5, the missionaries also got involved in linguistic work and developed literature in the vernacular, such as a Kriapim tree, an Asante tree, Fante, Ga, and Ebe. Reverend Chrysler began work in the country in 1853, and by 1857, he had translated the 4 Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles. In 1877, he translated the whole Bible into Twi. Basel mission records at Akora Chrysler indicate that he was assisted by Basel seminary trained teachers Jonathan Bequin, Paul Keteku, and later Reverend David Asante. Chrysler's Twi grammar and dictionary were published in 1875 and 1888, respectively. Chrysler also started the publication of Christophorus and Kakafo, the Christian Messenger, in 1883. Reverend Zimmerman studied Ga and began the translation of the 4 Gospels in 1854. In 1857, he published the Ga Grammar and Dictionary and also finished the Ga Hymn Book the same year. In 1866, he produced the Ga version of the whole Bible. There was also the work of Johannes Capitan on the Fante language. 6, the missionaries established printing presses, just as the Presbyterian Press, the Catholic Press, the Infantine Press, owned by the Methodists, who also had the largest number of bookshops, including mobile bookshops and libraries in Western, Central, and much later in the Asante region. 7, the last but not the least, they made a significant contribution in laying the foundation for formal education in Ghana. The Basel and Methodist missions built elementary schools, secondary schools, training colleges, and trade schools. Some of these were the Akora Presbyterian Seminary, founded in 1848, the Methodists founded Infantine Secondary School in 1876. Wesley Girls High School started in 1836 as a school to groom ladies for the emerging African middle class, before it became a secondary school in 1886. There was also Wesley College, founded by the Methodists. Adesardal College, formerly called St. Nicholas Grammar School, was opened by the Anglicans in 1910. The Catholics founded St. Augustine's College at Cape Coast in 1936. The list is endless. During the First World War, 1914 to 1918, the Basel missionaries were deported. At the time of their departure, they had to their credit 176 schools and 196 congregations scattered across southeastern, central, and the Asante regions, as well as 28 Ghanaian ministers and a large number of teachers and catechists. In January 1918, when the last set of Basel missionaries left Ghana, a Presbyterian type of administration was also in the process of becoming a feature of the mission church. At the local level, the congregation had a session headed by the African ministers and presbyters. A presbyter means an elder. In 1926, the foreign mission of the United Church of Scotland came to the aid of the Basel Church seminaries and schools, and they also performed creditably. They opened their first secondary school at Krobodumase in 1938. It was later moved to Legon and is now known as the Presbyterian Boys Secondary School, Presec. At this time, the Methodists had beaten all the Christian missions in the country in terms of the number of secondary schools they had built. In 1938, the Scottish mission put up training colleges for women at Ebri, Krobo, and Agogo. Professor Edubuahi opines that the greatest contribution of the missionary societies was in the field of education. In his classic book, Topics of West African History, he states, and I quote, "Some famous princes and paramount chiefs received high education at the Basel Seminary at Akropo and Christiansburg in 1867, at Betifin 1878, Begro 1885, Enum 1891, and in Sabah in 1905. Some of these were Nana Matikoli, Nana F.W. Kwesi Akufo, and Nana Furiata. Of these 3 people, the only one who had a teaching career before ascending to the stool was Nene Matikwan. Professor Dubois states, all aspects of the life of the Africans were influenced by the activities of these missionary societies. And one of the main results was the emergence of a new type of African, educated, Christian, having European taste in clothing, food, drink, and music, exposed through reading to ideas and influences from abroad, but still maintaining his African roots and shouldering his responsibilities to his extended family and his traditional authority, unquote. So I move to the second part, employment in the formal sector in Ghana and its relationship to formal education. Up to 1850, the higher ranks of the colonial government service consisted solely of European men because qualification to these ranks required a certificate in secondary or higher education. James Bannerman of Accra qualified as the first African man to join these ranks in 1850. In 1860, the second African man to qualify to join the higher ranks of the service was John Bankson of Anamabo. The lower ranks of the service, however, was dominated by African men who qualified to be employed because they had the basic primary education. In 1890, the first African woman entered the government service. She was Miss Elizabeth Ferguson from Anamabo, and she qualified on the basis of higher education to occupy the position of postmistress and telegraph clerk. Asantekas number crack and crack. The L and the R. Post office and postmistress and telegraph clerk at Anamabo. After that date, the government service that had been men-dominated became open to women, but not until the governor, W. Bramford Griffith, had written to the Secretary of State in London to ask for permission to employ her. In a letter dated 18 September 1890, Governor Griffith wrote, "My Lord, I take leave very respectfully to submit to your Lordship's perusal and consideration the accompanying documents relating to the employment of Miss Elizabeth Ferguson, a young native lady whose father is much respected at Anamabo, where he takes great interest in agricultural affairs. And I may also mention that the young lady is a sister to Mr. George Ferguson, whom your Lordship was so good as to permit to study for a year at the Royal School of Mines in 1888-1890. 2. The letter of Mr. Ferguson Sr. raises some interesting questions in connection with the employment of young women educated in the colony and points out how their educational values may be turned to account. My belief is that the education of young native ladies, properly trained, will be in many respects quite valuable to the government as those of native male clerks who may be employed in similar work to the form. And I feel sure that I should be consulting your Lordship's wishes in finding occupation for them whenever suitable opportunities occur. Because as stated in my minutes of the 15th April last to the Acting Colonial Secretary, I strongly incline to the belief that the admission of young ladies who are in public service is calculated to have a useful, most useful and moralizing effect generally in the service, unquote. On 23rd October 1890, Secretary of State Nasford replied, "I approve of your action in this matter, and I concur in your view that it is desirable to employ young women who have been educated in the colony in the government service whenever suitable opportunities occur." At this point in Ghana's history, those who were employable in the formal sector were those who had passed through the Christian mission schools or privately owned schools and had received primary, middle, and higher education. Professor Menome relates that the British colonial government began to give a thought to formal education in the country when in 1850, the development of education became the colonial official policy. And in 1851-52, Governor Hill passed the Education Ordinance, quote, to provide for the better education of the inhabitants of His Majesty's Forts and Settlements of the Gold Coast. Part of the income expected from the 1850 poll tax was to be spent on education and health. The tax was abandoned because of local opposition, but the government continued to show some interest in education. Mr. H.O.A. McWilliam, in his book, The Development of Education in Ghana, indicates the contribution of the colonial government to formal education in Ghana in these ways. Quote, for most of the colonial era, the Christian missionaries maintained the upper hand. In the 1880s, there were only 2 government schools in the country, one in Accra and the other at Cape Coast, while there were about 100 mission schools. In 1854, Governor Hill appointed a European schoolmaster to head the school at Cape Coast. And in 1856, the government opened 9 more schools, including one for girls at Cape Coast. In 1870, the government gave £100 to the Basel Mission and £50 to the Wesleyan Mission to assist them in their endeavors. In 1880, the Wesleyan Mission received additional £200 from the government. Then in 1882, the government passed an education ordinance. Under it, there were to be 2 types of primary schools. The first were government schools, which were to be paid for by the government. And the second were schools set up by the missionaries and private persons, which would be assisted by the government according to their efficiency. According to Mr. W.E.F. Ward, a history teacher at Achimota School in the 1950s, the 1882 Education Ordinance required that, in addition, the general board, local board should also be set up to inspect schools, certify the competence of teachers, and generally act as the agents of the general board to which they were responsible. The curriculum was always to include reading, writing, and arithmetic, popularly called the 3 R's, with needlework for girls. Extra subjects in the school at the option of the teacher or the local board were history, geography, and English grammar. Mr. Ward opines that the 1882 ordinance was not successful. So in 1887, a new education ordinance was passed, and this formed the basis of the educational system until 1925. Professor Ameneme recalls that despite all these efforts, by 1887, the government still contributed only 1/10 of the total cost of education in the country. He states, in 1888, the total number of pupils in the government schools in Accra and Cape Coast was 832 boys and 217 girls. In 1901, there were 7 government schools as compared with 115 mission schools. From 1903, the government began to give certificates for passing primary school standard 7 leaving examinations. After British authority was established in Asante and the Northern Territories, education was extended to these areas also. In the Northern Territories, the government did not allow the missionary societies a free hand to develop the educational and social work as they had done in the South. The government took the lead and opened schools in Kumasi and Tamale in 1907. Between 1925 and 1930, the standard of primary education in Ghana improved greatly. The effects were felt in employment circles. Many more Ghanaians participated in local government, commerce, industry, teaching, and church work. The third part of my paper, the special role played by Governor Brigadier General Sir Gordon Gattisberg. Before Sir Gattisberg became governor in 1919, it was very clear that the colonial government lagged far behind the Christian mission so far as secondary and higher education was concerned. This was because the colonial government held the view that its first business was to provide primary education for all, and that until that was done, its expenditure on secondary school education had to be limited. I say something briefly on Gattisberg background, but I think it will all be part of the production, so I don't need to indicate everything. But Gattisberg was born in Canada in 1869, taken to England at the age of 10 by his mother, who after her first husband's death had remarried an English admiral. And I give details about his education, his background. But I think in the light of our topic, what is important for us is that Gattisberg was given the position of a governor of the Gold Coast. And it was a great revolution, according to F.K. Boer, in British colonial history. Barely 2 months after assuming office, he summed up the main goals of his administration to the Legislative Council as follows, quote, "Whatever decision I may be called upon to make, I promised the people of the Gold Coast that I would always be guided by the fact that I am an engineer. And I'm out here to pretend the construction of a broad highway of progress, along with the races of the Gold Coast, we advance to those far-off cities of promise, the cities of final development, wealth, and happiness. In 1924, Sir Gagisberg described as urgent the need for well-educated African men and women to join the colonial government service. Besides the need of government, he said, there was also the need of the European firms, mercantile, banking, and professional. Sir Gagisberg made a passionate appeal to the Secretary of State in London about the need to employ more Africans, quote, because they had great potentialities. In that same year, he published a booklet of 59 pages with 10 chapters entitled The Keystone. And the caption in front of the booklet reads, "Education is the keynote of progress. Mix the materials badly and omit the most important, and the arch will collapse." Omit character training from education, and progress will stop, unquote. In a summary of context, he writes in the foreword why this booklet is written and to whom it applies. The moment is ripe for reviewing education, laying the foundation stone of Achimota. Chapter 1, he entitles Necessity for Better Education of the African. Chapter 2, he deals with character training. Chapter 3 of his book, he calls The Kind of Education We Want, Its Place in Policy, and Its Cost. Chapter 4, he tackles education today, the defect. Chapter 5, he labels the remedy. Chapter 6 is designated as Proposed Education System. The chapter I love most is chapter 7. Gagisberg's emphasis on, quote, the education of women. Chapter 8 deals with technical and trade training. And chapter 9, professional training. Chapter 10, permanent policy in education. On education of women, Gagisberg states, I will now turn to a subject of the utmost importance to the progress of the local races, namely the education of women. So Gagisberg goes on to say, the younger generation of men are beginning to demand that their wives should possess other qualifications than those hitherto considered necessary. And that this is a remark which applies in great force in the Gold Coast. For nothing more detrimental to the progress of this race can be imagined than the present system of educated husbands and illiterate wives. Africans are realizing there's more every day, indeed to such an extent that I believe we are entering on a new era. And it is important to note that in his passion to have Africans, both male and female, educated, Gagisberg stated on pages 8 to 9 in his book the following. Are the critics aware that the African races, in spite of their lack of educational facilities, of character training, have produced men who are future generations of Africans, that we must leave the task of proving that the belief of the critics of their race is wrong, of justifying the confidence placed in them by the British government of today. So Gagisberg strongly recommended that Africans be given a good education, not limited to primary and middle schools, but involving secondary schools and university colleges. He stated that it was only by providing a higher education that Africans could be employed, particularly in the higher appointments of the government service. Gagisberg expressed dismay that the colony was turning out around 4,000 to 5,000 boys only fitted to be clerks. As part of his commitment to formal education in Ghana, a number of committees were set up by Gagisberg to study the state of education in Ghana and to make recommendations. One was the Gold Coast Committee, Educationist Committee, headed by D.J. Oman, set up in 1920. And they stated among other things that the enrollment of females was so low. They attributed it to three major reasons. First, the common attitude to women, an elemental sense of the place of women in normal primitive society. Second, the vocation of practically every girl in this country is prospective marriage and motherhood. For this vocation, the girl is prepared by her parents or guardians, as marriage in this country is early. And third, the sense of the value of education for its own sake grows slowly. The committee recommended that the curriculum in the schools should be slightly different for girls because of physiological differences. Games were to be different, and those subjects which would help girls for future home life should be taught, namely sewing, hygiene, cooking, and general housewifery. It further recommended the establishment of a secondary boarding school for boys alone in Achimota, since, quote, the enrollment of girls in the various schools in the country was extremely low. Gaggisberg's aspiration for higher education for African boys and girls was affirmed on March 6, 1924, when in his address to the Legislative Council, he said, "What is really required is an institution at which our teachers can obtain higher education before learning how to teach." The colonial government seems to like March 6. March 6, bond of 1844, March 6, 1924, independence, March 6, 1957. I don't know what March 6 did to them. In 1927, the same year that Achimota College was built, Gaggisberg laid the foundation stone of the buildings of the Akora Prof Training College. His government provided £20,000 to the Presbyterian Church out of a total budget of £30,000. The Presbyterian Church contributed the remaining £10,000. I'm on my fourth point, soon I'll be to the fifth, and I'll end. The fourth point, the indefatigable roles played by Reverends Agri and Fraser. And I have a background of Agri, but I think it will be printed, so I don't need to go over all that. I think what is important to me for Agri is the fact that he was very learned, and he took all the teacher certificate examinations offered by the Department of Education, and the last of these was in 1895. And he did not only stand first among 119 candidates all over the country, but was the only one who gained a second class. So according to Dr. J.S. Epson, in his book Gallery of Gold Coast Celebrities, the certificate of education he obtained qualified him without any further education to teach in any similar school in any British colony the world over. Epson relates that the Legislative Council voted £15 in his favor to purchase books in appreciation. Agri made the Cape Coast Wesleyan School the best school in the colony, with its 400 enrolled students, according to the then Director of Education. And Agri did a lot. He was the Secretary of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. He carried the petition for signatures to prevent the colonial government Public Land Bill in 1897. Agri contributed many articles to the Gold Coast Methodist Times. Agri was also a soldier. He served under Sir Francis Cunningham Scott of the Gold Coast Constabulary in the expedition to Kumasi in December 1896. Immediately after he returned to Cape Coast, his father's people, his father was a chief linguist, and they honored him as Tufuni. From 10 July 1898 up to 15 October 1924, Agri spent the time in the United States pursuing higher education. And Agri got a lot of laurels, which we do not need to repeat here. Agri served as the only African member on 2 internationally reputed education commissions for Africa. The Phil Stokes Fund Commission, which was regarded as the keystone to raising the standard of education in Africa. According to Epson, in her will dated 1909, Miss Caroline Phil Stokes bequeathed her fortune, amounting to almost $1 million, to trustees, with the instruction that the income be used, quote, for the education of Negroes, both in Africa and the United States, North American Indians, and needy, deserving white students. Out of this came 2 committees, which toured almost every country in Africa for fact-finding, both of which Agri featured prominently. And I have all the details, the places and the dates, but I think it was going to come in book form. We do not need to repeat them here. To Agri, his idea of education was that it should be an all-inclusive type. Secular education was abhorrent to him. So Agri stated, by education, I do not mean simply learning. I mean the training of the mind in morals, and in a hand that helps to make one more socially efficient. Not simply the 3 R's, but the 3 H's: the head, the hand, and the heart. No race or people can be half slave, half free. The surest way to keep a people down is to educate the men and neglect the women. And this is where if you educate a man, you simply educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate a family. Unquote from Agri. With respect to university education, Agri opined, quote, it should combine the best from the East with the best from the West, the best of Africa and the best of Europe, Asia, and America. And he emphasized, it should encourage original thinking, encourage research, help to add to human knowledge. We of West Africa have proved that we can get the classics, theology, and philosophy. We are past masters of jurisprudence and dialectics. The question is, can we turn such knowledge more and more into the service of the Commonwealth? Can we give back with interest what we have received? I believe we can. University education should aim to give women parallel training and someday co-education. Agri was also an advocate for interracial cooperation. He contributed a lot to the cause of peace. Agri expressed this, for example, by the piano keys. Quote, you can play a tune of sorts. And my father is here, emeritus. Hope you are listening, whether what Agri is saying is true. Agri says, quote, you can play a tune of sorts on the black keys. And you can play a tune of sorts on the white keys. But for harmony, you must use both the black and the white, unquote. At the same time, he also shouted out loud and clear, quote, I am proud of my color. Whoever is not proud of his color is not fit to live. Agri married an African-American lady called Miss Rosebud Douglas of Portsmouth, USA. And they had, within 5 years of marriage, they had 3 children. Abner, Sabia, 1907, Kwedu, 1908, Rosebud, 1910. Then on 24th July, 1926, a 4th child was born, Orson Rudolph Gatchisburg. Agri took pains to train them. A year after Agri joined the staff of Achimota School as a co-founder, he left for the USA and returned on 28th January 1927. In May that year, he left for England and the USA, only to die on 30th July of meningitis. Epstein says, quote, Agri's death was a sad but great affair. He was mourned in all the continents. 2,000 mourners, white and black, attended the service in the auditorium of Livingston College. In Europe, Africa, Asia, America, and Australia, ovations and last respects were offered in his honor. Epstein draws the curtain on Agri by saying, the Agri Student Society, formed in April 1928 in America and the Gold Coast, and the Agri House, Achimota, Ghana, together with millions of Africans and Europeans who admire his noble achievements, always make Agri immortal and inspire those of later generations to further greatness. Fraser, he was from Tilly County, Clackman, Scotland. His father was Sir H.L. Fraser, who was at that time the British Lieutenant Governor at Bengal. He was educated at a school in Edinburgh and so on. But what is interesting about Fraser is that he worked in Kenya, married in Kenya, and later called to assist with the work of Achimota School. I'm about to finish. The most exciting part for me is that Agri and Fraser worked hand in hand with respect to Achimota School. So in 1922, when the committee was set up, it was Agri with Dr. Jesse Jones. 2 years earlier, they taught many parts of Africa. And then we have Agri and Fraser, 1926, very important historical date. Agri and Fraser traveled the length and breadth of Ghana to explain the idea of Achimota to the people. They emphasized the importance of girls and women's education during these tours. And Agri convinced many parents and guardians to send their daughters to the boarding house Achimota, saying over and over again, quote, if you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate a family. Correct for 3 points. Reverend Agri and Fraser developed students, ranging in age from infants to university graduates. They also engaged the staff and students in social services. They developed close contact between staff and students. They were allowed to choose their own staff. In 1930, they secured for Achimota complete freedom from government control. In 1935, Achimota produced its first university graduates. The first graduate in engineering was R.P. Bafo, who became the first Ghanaian vice-chancellor of KNUST, after the departure of the expatriate principal, W.C. Duncanson. After retiring from Achimota in 1935, Fraser became the warden of Newcastle Abbey in Scotland for 2 years, and so on. I've named Gaggisberg, Agri, and Fraser the amazing trio because of the historical documents I've looked at. Their thoughts, ideas, and achievements and work, I think, were above their generation. They were, in my opinion, such a great trio. Gaggisberg and Fraser came to the country from the Western world, and specifically from England and Scotland, where formal education was initially confined to boys alone, and girls were not allowed to go to school. For them to come to Ghana and say girls should go to school, I think they were above their generation. From the ancient period through the medieval period to the modern period of history, the available documents show that women were regarded as the other. They were primarily not men, but men. In the process of defining who a woman should be, society also decided on what a woman should do. The world has witnessed biblical perceptions, Hebrew perceptions, Greek perceptions, Roman perceptions, and biological perceptions on women. The biological sciences definition of women were, quote, that group of the human species whose typical members are able to conceive, carry a fetus, give birth, and lactate. Women were conceptualized in terms of their endocrine and reproductive systems that made them different from men. The European world condensed all the perceptions, and applied them in full. A former colleague at the nursing department, Legon, who embarked on a doctoral program in the Department of History a few years ago and sat in some of my women in history classes, shared with us the fact that, quote, everything begins with men. And so we have menstruation, menopause, female, woman. In the 13th century, the English jurist Henry de Bracton stated, quote, a woman is obliged to obey her husband in everything as long as he does not order her to do something in violation of divine law, unquote. In 15th century England, public schools were attended exclusively by boys. Girls from wealthy families and the nobility were taught at home by tutors. Peasants, for the most part, were not educated. In the early 16th century, when Martin Luther began his Protestant reform movement, he held the general belief of his predecessors and contemporaries that, quote, women had been created for no other purpose than to serve men and be their helpers, unquote. Family relationships were intrinsically hierarchical, with the husband housebound, meaning husband. He was housebound as the head of the household. The wife was second in rank, and the children were duty-bound to obey their parents. The husband was required to, quote, give honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and the wife was to submit herself to her husband as unto the Lord, unquote. In the 17th century, the Puritans in North America echoed the hierarchy that has existed in Christianity for many centuries and had many ways of differentiating what was proper for men and what was proper for women. Men and women entered the church by separate doors and were seated according to their sex and rank. Men with men, women with women, children with children, with the most prominent men sitting in the front pews. Only men were expected to speak publicly. American author Nancy Woolard relates, quote, from the 17th to the 20th century, the ideology of female subordination prevalent in England as elsewhere in Europe, was transported intact and easily replanted in colonial American soil. As a result, women in the colonies were excluded from positions of power and authority and only entered public history by catastrophe or deviance, such as Indian captivity and witchcraft charges. Mary Yalom, another American author, recalls that in the 18th century, something new was added to the identity of Western women, a political consciousness. When America and France threw off the yoke of monarchy, the political awareness of women on both sides of the Atlantic took on new dimensions. Women felt they were as implicated in national events as their husbands, fathers, brothers, and sons. She states, quote, "But wifehood was so constructed around three basic identities. A wife was first and foremost her husband's sexual and emotional partner. Second, she became in most cases a mother with parental obligations shared with her husband. And third, and in all cases, she was a housekeeper." What is new under the sun, ladies? In traditional Africa and Ghana, oral tradition relates that from ancient to modern times, kinship was the core of the social structure. The family began as a nuclear one and gradually got extended. Every African and Ghanaian belonged and still belongs to a family, a lineage, and a clan. Between 1990 and 1995, as part of my doctoral program, I took questionnaires on indigenous slavery in Ghana to all the 10 administrative regions in Ghana. Among the questions I asked were our traditional concepts, ideas, and roles of women. I got 5 major answers, according from 375 respondents, and they said they had given me the answers in order of importance. Please listen to the answers. First, a woman is valuable because she's the bedrock of the family, on whom continuity of the lineage depends. Second, a woman is the custodian of culture and the repertoire of knowledge. Hence, the Akan saying, "Yanko bisa abrewa," meaning let us go and ask the old woman whenever there was a political, social, or religious crisis. Third, a woman should be economically active, productive, and industrious. 4, a woman is a housekeeper. And 5, a woman must bear, rear, and train children. Those of us who are Africans and Ghanaians know that in our history, African women have played and continue to play important political, military, religious, economic, and social roles in our traditional governance and country. That is why, for example, Nana Yaa Asantewaa, the Adwosu-Hema of Asante, is often mentioned. She held a gun and led the Asante forces to fight against the British colonial government when, after sending the Asante-Hema and a number of chiefs and elders on exile to the island of Seychelles, Governor Hodgson had the audacity to ask for the Asante golden stool that was believed to embody the life and soul of every Asante. That is why the Asante people proudly beat their chests and say, "Today, a traditional song, which according to veteran journalist Cameron Dodo, was composed by the Achim women to honor Nana Yaa Asantewaa, is still sung on festive occasions, at funerals, etc. in her honor. Kro kro hin kre, Yaa Asantewaa oba besi otra frem wanwe, wa yebi amayo. Kro kro hin kre, Yema odemrifa. Kro kro hin kre, Yaa Asantewaa oba besi otra frem wanwe, wa yebi amayo. Kro kro hin kre, Yema odemrifa. In 1848, there was a lady leader of one of the In 1848, there was a lady leader of one of the Ahanta Asafo companies, who, together with all her female team, accompanied Governor Wynyard in his expedition against the Nzema chief, Kaku Aka. Wynyard was shocked. Somebody actually drew the lady. They could not believe that a woman could lead a military wing. And all of them were women. And they drew the picture. They were shocked. They are coming from Britain, where they felt that the woman was below. And they helped Wynyard in the conquest of Chief Kaku Aka. There is the strong Ga Queen Mother, Dodi Akai, who is described in Ga oral history as so strong and so tyrannical that she was eventually tricked into a deep well and covered when she asked her people to dig the well with their bare fingers. There is no doubt in my mind that Agri had all these ideas, pictures, and knowledge in mind when he made that profound statement: if you educate a man, you educate an individual. If you educate a woman, you educate a family. He knew at first hand what Ghanaian and African women were made of. When the colonial government founded Achimota College in 1927, it was meant to be a co-educational institution that would provide education from kindergarten, primary school, secondary school, a teacher training college, and ultimately a university college. The University of Ghana, founded in 1948, began on the compound of Achimota and began a gradual movement to Legon campus as it was being built. I was privileged to be born in October 1952, a month after my father, Emeritus Professor Nketia, joined the staff of the Sociology Department at Legon through the invitation of Dr. Buzia. So I witnessed as a child the gradual movement from Achimota to Legon. Some of the staff still live on the Achimota compound, and they come to work at Legon. The entire capital outlay of Achimota, as well as over £500,000, was provided by the colonial government. The colonial government also financed the schools with current expenditure for a while. Reverend Fraser became the first principal of Achimota College. He was ably assisted by his African right-hand man, Reverend Dr. Agri. Mr. Ward remarks, and I quote, almost at the end, the combination of Fraser with his experience, energy, and enthusiasm, and Agri with his genius and friendship, his slogan, only the best is good enough for men, who said before Achimota the high ideal of providing an education European in thoroughness, but African as well as European in content. Ward says the future of Ghana will depend very much on its success in achieving this educational aim. And then he says, when Governor Gadisberg founded Achimota College, he expressed the hope that it will one day develop into a university college for the whole of British West Africa. This hope soon became a national inspiration of the country. As Achimota developed its post-secondary classes, the country felt that the aspiration was near fulfillment. Their team spirit and the combination of what each had in them, such as home training, character building, formal education, etc., made the team a great force to tackle the concept of Achimota. From the historical events I have unraveled in this keynote address on the building of Achimota School, I would like to call them the great trial in the story of the concept and the subsequent building of Achimota School. It is very clear that in the history of formal education in Ghana, if Sir Gadisberg had not been forthright about the dire need for a secondary education as a commitment from the British colonial government, secondary education from the front of the colonial government might have taken a longer time to be realized. Perhaps it would still have been in the hands of the Christian missions alone. University education would have been an unthought of. The Great Trial laid the foundation for Achimota. Laid this foundation on Achimota's soil. The Great Trial's firm belief that girls and women needed formal education, not only at the primary school level, but also a higher education in a secondary school or teacher training college, and a bright future in university education, was a great difference in attitude to the other British governors who had come to Ghana since the 16th century until the middle of the 20th century, who were just saying they wouldn't even bother about higher education. Only primary school education was good enough for the people of Ghana. To keep the chiefs, elders, and the people of Ghana at peace, the Great Trial added life skills to the curriculum of girls to assure parents and guardians that in future, their daughters and wards who had gone to school would be great wives, good mothers, and wonderful grandmothers. The Great Trial had a vision of a school complex consisting of a kindergarten, a primary school, a secondary school, a teacher training college, and a university. Such thoughts and actions were unprecedented at that time in the history of Ghana, Africa, and beyond. I trust that the five-pronged fork approach I mentioned in my introduction has become clearer now, having gone through a quick history of Ghana with respect to formal education, through the lens of Reverend Dr. Agri's profound statement. If you educate a man, you educate an individual. If you educate a woman, you educate a family. Thank you for your attention.